And hold on, let me just pull up the list of everybody. And just as a reminder, we are going to see all of these presentations, and then after the presentations, you will get to vote on which to receive a first prize award of seed money, which is $500, and which to receive a second prize award, which is $250. Sorry, there are a lot of slides here. And so we will get to vote at the end. So, as you can see, we have 4 presentations. First, we have Silvia Xavier talking about Pimpex New York, and I'm just going to hand it over to her. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. As it was introduced, I'm Silvia Xavier. I'm from the Design and Urban Ecologist program here at Parsons, and I will present the work I'm doing with waste pickers in New York. So just to introduce, my subject is waste, but it's especially the people working with waste, these workers that are engaged in making this system move, and especially informal sector that is also related to recycling. In this presentation, I'll just contextualize the problem, show a little bit of my research, the proposal, a pilot project that we've made, and what I'm proposing now, the new intervention, the costs, and the expected outcomes. Just a roadmap for this. So what first drove me to this subject, it's actually a film that was published by the SNY. And as you can see, the SNY is identifying a crime scene. And in this video, what they go on to show is the work of people who are walking the streets, collecting cans and bottles. They exchange these cans and bottles for 5 cents. This happens under the bottle bill. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a state law that started in the 70s. So the SNY, and there is all these scenes are from the video. And the narrator goes on to say that these workers are stealing the future of New York City recycling. And they go on to explain this. And again, those are images from the video. I thought it was very clear that there are valuable materials in the waste stream, and there is a cost to the recycling collection. As this part that is valuable goes away, then the collection has higher costs. So that's the argument. And then they go on to say that don't allow scavenging. That's the way they relate to this activity, to steal recycling's future. And the argument makes sense. What really got my attention is that it is a purely economic argument for an issue that is also social. Recycling has like an environmental component, economic component, but also a very strong social component to it. And I thought this was neglected in this narrative from the SNY. Another thing that I thought is that the city has ambitious goals for the zero waste vision, right? To reach zero waste by 2030, and I just thought other narratives were possible. These people could be allies instead of adversaries in this system. And I knew other perspectives existed, so I went on to research, and I know that that's my own interpretation of the word. And I know that waste picking is not just an issue in New York City, it's all over the world. I went on to identify common threads in this. I just go fast. I went on to see that there are other discourses on integrated systems and on the legitimacy of the work of waste pickers and the social role of recycling as well. And I went on to talk to waste pickers in New York City. I interviewed them. I learned about their lives, the spaces that they used. And I found this Shuriken, which is a redemption center that does an amazing work providing support to canners. It's a place where they go to exchange the bottles, but the idea is to have not only the economic exchange, but also the social exchange. So it's a non-for-profit redemption center that supports canners. And my research also led me to Brazil, which is actually where I come from. And there we have a very interesting situation that waste pickers are actually legally recognized. And the there is a federal law that encourages municipalities that already have their Department of Sanitation operations to make partnerships with waste pickers to just have a better working system. And there, what I found is, although we have this legal framework in the streets, the workers still face some kind of prejudice. There's a social stigma related to the idea of dealing with waste, right? So that's what this Pimp My Carroça project is addressing. They propose to have a collaborative action to engage people, make visible, and transform the waste pickers' activity. And they have very big events where they provide health, service, and haircut, and even massage to waste pickers. But their main activity is to actually make like a cart makeover, partnering with artists, and also provide this package of safety equipment for the workers. So I thought it was a really interesting project, and that is giving a response to this idea of integration, not from a legal point of view, but from a very social and collaborative point of view. And I thought I could bring it to New York. They had the method. They did this project there in Brazil many times, and I had the chance to interview waste pickers who participated in this project there, and they were really supportive. And I got very inspiring reports from them, ranging from like increasing out self-esteem and pride to actually leading to more cans, more material collected, because people would stop them, ask about the cart, and then start a conversation, and then create a partnership, and this would lead them to more materials, more income, and engaging in the society. So I thought about having this collaborative action here. This would promote recognition for canners in New York City, bring attention to their cause, and just open the conversation, as we are doing here, for how these workers can participate in the waste system. So this is like the pilot project that we had. We were able to put together the first Pimpex New York. It happened in 9th April. We crowd-raised the campaign through Indiegogo. We had 3 canners participating. We went on to talk to them, make some experiments with the carts they use here to see how it could improve. We did sketches to see what could be done with the cart, what goes where. And on the actual day, which was a Saturday, very rainy and snowy, but we were able to gather a lot of people, actually, to collaborate in this. And we gave them the equipment there. We reformed the carts. There were 3 carts. I'll show them later. The artists were there collaborating, and this integration was really fruitful as well. They felt respected and happy to have their carts cared for, their equipment cared for. And this is the result, the carts in the street. This is the first one, here being used by Anna, that is from Shuriken. Here is a second one being used by Eugene. And the third one is being used by Shuriken to collect compost. So they use a bike, and there go several buckets that they use for collecting compost. So what I'm proposing here now is to amplify that, to have a second edition of the Pimpex New York here. I feel this can support more canners, and we will spread the message, having more carts in the streets. Again, what I feel is that this is not the legal response to the problem I posed before, and the legal response is needed, but I feel it's a response we can give in terms of legitimizing the activity and showing our respect and how this collaboration could be possible from a grassroots and not if the municipality is not responding accordingly, so we can respond in another way. For this project, what we would need to provide equipment to 2 more canners and to reform 2 more carts, it's a total of $550. In the other one, we did 3 carts, and this really gave me the experience on how it works, and I feel confident that this amount we would be able to reform 2 more carts. And what is the expected outcomes of the second intervention? As I said, is to amplify the action, and this will expand the benefits as well. Better working conditions, the pride, visibility, the new partnerships that come with that. And this idea of giving this response of, is collaboration possible? And my answer is yes, and this is how we are responding, legitimizing the activity and calling for public recognition and opening the conversation for how canners can contribute to this, to the future of New York City waste system. Here is just, in my research, I also try to back it up with theoretical ideas, and there is this homeless vehicle that was analyzed by Neil Smith, and he says that it empowers evicted to erase their own erasure. He is talking about homeless, but I thought the project was quite close in the sense that it's the workers being powered by their own activity and their own equipment and finding a more inclusionary approach to their work. That's it, what I'm proposing. Thank you, and I wanted to put up a video of our intervention while we open for questions and answers. This is the video for the intervention we had in Shuriken.
And we can take a couple questions now.
This one? Oh.
Yeah, so that I find this a profoundly interesting project, and I'm curious to know who is doing the work of making the changes to the carts themselves, and who else is involved other than you and the people who use the carts.
Sure. Thank you. That's a great question, and I didn't have time to include everything in the presentation, so it's great to have it. I had a big support from Sure We Can. We had a little team there working. Corinne, who is here, she works there and she helped us. So we had a little group there working on this video and on the organizing and putting the crowdfunding together. We had amazing support from the artists. So in Sure We Can, we have a very skillful maker as well. So Rene, who works there, was responsible for reforming one of the carts. The other two artists were responsible for reforming the other carts. So the very operational part was all a collaborative thing between me, Shuriken, and the artists who were willing to participate. And that's the question there was. And yeah, again, we got the money to, all the budget that we had was for the material. So the plastic panels that we used, some tools, the painting, the equipment for the canners themselves, and the wood that goes into providing space, more space for them. We opened the base of the cart, so it goes all the way down, increasing the capacity. And all the work was actually voluntary from these people that were engaged in the project. And the canners were there in the beginning. Eugene stayed until the end and tested the cart, so there was this interaction of us planning before with them and then being there following the work and seeing what was being done. And that's the same. The purpose is to repeat this method for the second intervention as well, having 2 more canners and these artists participating.
My other question is, did you get to know the canners through the partnership with Sure We Can, or and maybe you can speak to how they developed relationships with them?
Yes. So the canners that I interviewed and that participated are part. They go to Sure We Can to redeem their bottles and cans, and I got to know them there. And it's a relationship that is developed much more. I feel I was very lucky to find Shuriken and to be able to reach the kenners. I've been talking to kenners in the street as well, but I felt a lot of suspicion as something that never happened before, and are you taking my cart? What is happening? So it was a very good and direct way to build trust. And Shuriken has been here in New York for 10 years or more, I guess. So they were able already to pave this way for someone like an artist or proposing this idea to have some sort of confidence that this would work. And I feel that having some carts already out in the streets and rolling is still, again, supports this idea that this is possible, and having people, they took these carts to City Hall when there was the plastic ban rally. So, and one of the people who were there said that many people stopped, asked about the carts, and this is exactly the idea, like making this object a catalyst for conversations, like an intermediary to build these relations that are non-existent between the people who are throwing away and the people who are collecting, and the city that is in this gray space of criminalizing, or could we think of another way to do it situation. Yeah, so all the relations were through Shuriken, and we aim to continue supporting their work as well, because I feel it's both ways. They really supported me, but I feel this brings back to them, to their message. So the idea is to, again, have more kenners there to participate and refer back to them as well.
In this part of the research, what was the city's response after you show them what you've done? Mm-hmm. Because obviously there's a conflict, right?
Yes.
You have people on the street picking up trash, but also the city is also kind of doing the same, but they are not really recognizing what these people are doing.
Yes, that's a great question. And yes, I did reach out. I didn't reach out after this work was done. I reached out before for doing my research. And I don't know if you've seen in New York Times, there was an article as well. So there is this widespread, like the mainstream idea. And the main argument is that this activity is criminal. When I reached out to the SNY, it wasn't the SNY, it was someone in the sustainability office, the mayor's sustainability office. She was a coordinator. And the first response she gave me, it's like, they are thieves, I'm not partnering with thieves, like this. And for me, this is a very weak point. First, because this criminalization, the way I see it, it's a political choice. There is not inherently criminal in picking up waste, and the city actually contradicts itself, because the big apps, there was a big apps competition, and the one that won the competition chosen by the city was an app that you can report when you put the furniture down the curb, and then someone can come and pick it up. So the main argument that it's criminal to pick something up from the curb, that whatever is on the curb is city property, is actually contradictory, that, and weak. And it's a political choice. Like, it's not, if there is no moral guidelines that say that the waste should be city property. And it's differently elsewhere. So the response I got from the city is just stopping there. There is this legal aspect that apparently they are not willing to change and review. And then the next argument is the economic one that I was pointing out. It's costly to collect, and they are taking out the valuable part. And this, again, if you plan for participation, you can, the people who are collecting can then take it back to the city instead of taking, or the city could partner with the redemption centers. There are other ways to retrieve that materials that are taken away rather than, so, and yeah, so what I'm saying is, I don't see much space in the way they are planning now. And I'm not proposing here a policy plan. Like, I'm not saying how they should partner. I'm saying this is a valid work, this is a legitimate work as well, and I hope this will build, and this comes from my background as well. Like, I'm not a policy maker or something like this, I'm a designer, and this is my way to respond, calling for other people to participate and think about it and say, could we respond? Could we create a system that actually engages it in New York City? Long response. Does it answer your question?
Well, yeah, I assume the city wouldn't do much. I assume the city wouldn't try to help you on this. But I think you have something, and you should definitely, try to make them work with you. Because the people who's doing this, there's value for them.
Yes.
Right, and you cannot just neglect them. So.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's the idea. I'm happy it's working.
It's an incredibly timely issue, and it's an issue that's talked a lot about between different agencies in New York City. And you should definitely come and present to the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board, because they're people who are helping to advise on policy, and sometimes it's just going to a different person, but people are looking for new ideas and solutions, and it's great.
Right, thank
so
you.
I'll talk to you afterwards about that.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And we're now going to transition into our second presenter. One moment, please. All right, here you go, Ava.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Ava Burke. I am a MFA Design and Technology student at Parsons, and I'm going to talk to you briefly about my ongoing thesis project, which is called 1 part per million. So the issue that I'm dealing with started from when I was 9 years old. I watched a Bill Moyers special called Trade Secrets that my parents had left in a VHS tape around the house, and I was bored and I watched it, and it ruined my sense of childhood innocence in one fell swoop, because it talked about the chemical industry's history of really downplaying and downright just sort of conspiratorially concealing the harmful effects of its products, in particular vinyl chloride, which is the key ingredient in PVC plastic. PVC is currently the third most used plastic in the world, and we produced 30 billion pounds of it, of vinyl chloride, the raw material for it, in 2015 alone, and demand continues to rise 3.5% every year. And this is a huge problem because vinyl chloride is a known human carcinogen. I'm working with environmental chemist named Wilma Subra, who's a vinyl chloride expert, and she contextualized it for me as 1,000 times more toxic than lead. So that means it takes a dose 1,000 times smaller to become harmful to human health than exposure to lead or other carcinogens like benzene. And this is a huge problem because vinyl chloride is everywhere. PVC is everywhere, especially in building products. 70% of PVC is used in construction. And so I decided to undertake a bit of a different approach to raising awareness around this issue. I'm personally an avid handcrafter, and even being in the design and technology program, I've become possibly more committed to handcrafted techniques as ways of sort of exploring, giving sort of a meditative temporal space to exploring complex and difficult issues. So I decided to undertake a collaborative 1 million stitch needle-pointed data sculpture, mouthful, that is meant to raise awareness about vinyl chloride, its impacts, and the ways that it sort of intersects with our lives in a lot of different ways. So the number 1 part per million is my entry point to this issue because it's currently the maximum exposure limit for vinyl chloride workers. And most of the world's vinyl chloride comes from Louisiana because that's the cheapest place to produce it, given the sort of petrochemical pipeline from the Gulf of Mexico, because it is a petrochemical product. But studies have shown that cancer and genetic mutations still persist even at 1 part per million of exposure. 1 part per million literally means 1/1,000,000th of any volume of air, water, or soil contains vinyl chloride. That's the maximum allowable exposure for workers. And so it's a tiny number. Like, what does that even look like? And that's one of the things that my project is eventually going to show when all of these pieces are put together. It's trying to give a human scale and form to a number that really seems sort of inconsequentially small, when in fact in the context of vinyl chloride it's a really large number. So a bit about vinyl chloride's life cycle. Its vinyl chloride monomer is created from ethylene, which is a sort of mashup of petroleum and chlorine, and then that's made into ethylene dichloride, which is also a known carcinogen, and that's made into vinyl chloride, and then that's polymerized, and then a bunch of other really wonderful things like lead and phthalates are added to it to make it into all the different products that we use. So there are risks at every stage of the vinyl chloride life cycle. The primary risks actually coming from the creation of vinyl chloride, and so there's a very direct risk to communities that are right around where this chemical is produced, and those communities are largely communities of color that have very little recourse to combat the insane amounts of pollution that they're exposed to every day. People who live around vinyl chloride production facilities are actually routinely exposed to more like 10 parts per million of vinyl chloride, and that's 24 hours a day. The 1 part per million exposure limit was made based on imagining an 8-hour shift, and it's a time-weighted average over an 8-hour workday shift. But when you live next to a plant, you don't get to go home after 8 hours. That is where you live. And so I'm basically trying to raise awareness through this participatory needlepoint project about this issue, and I'm reaching out to a larger public audience of consumers because we all come into contact with PVC products every day and can choose whether or not to continue purchasing them, but also particularly to architects and designers because of the role that PVC plays in the construction market. There are viable alternatives to PVC products, but those will not gain traction in the market unless and until architects and designers buy in to stopping using PVC and using other materials instead. And it's a huge uphill battle given the immense resources that the vinyl chloride industry has in marketing, especially marketing to the architecture and design communities. So I'm seeing my project as a way to catalyze conversation. It's not necessarily something that can in and of itself solve the problem, quote unquote, because really this is such a deeply ingrained material in the very fabric of our daily lives, but we need to move beyond it. And so the things that you can do that I'm suggesting that everyone does is to avoid purchasing vinyl and PVC products whenever you can as an everyday consumer. And then also one of the things that the group that I'm working with in Louisiana in the community of Mossville is running up against is that no one beyond their immediate community is really standing up for their rights to a healthy environment. And so I'm trying to raise awareness particularly about the direct impact that vinyl chloride exposure has on this community. 80% of Mossville residents are sick in some chronic form or another, and their dioxin levels in their blood are 3 times the national average because vinyl chloride production releases dioxins. And then also, like I said, encourage architects and designers to specify alternative building materials and really start a conversation in terms of sustainable building materials that encompasses the entire life cycle of the material rather than just talking about PVC materials are technically, yes, cheap, versatile, durable, all of these things, and the industry's done a really good job of saying it's a green material because during its usage cycle it's very inert, and that's true. PVC products are not bad when they're just sitting there, but we need to look at the full scope of what it takes to make an object and what it takes to dispose of it, and then back to the keynote address, incinerate things or leave them in landfills where it degrades over time. And 44 parts per million of vinyl chloride has been observed in the air surrounding landfills, and so it's a real problem. And this is my sort of one way of catalyzing a discussion around it. The project is ongoing right now. I have distributed 175 kits And then I've received back around 40 so far. I started the project in February, and so it's still a long way from completion. I will need 625 squares for it to be complete. Each square is 1,600 stitches. And so eventually it will be hung up all together in a sort of tapestry-style data sculpture, and I hope to be able to bring it to different art galleries around the country, and also bring it to legislators, bring it to the EPA, bring it to people who need some sort of visual hook to really get a handle on this issue. And anyway, thank you so much. Also, if you want to participate, everyone is more than welcome to participate. Tell your friends, tell everyone you've ever met. The kits are free. You can request one on my website. I also have a bunch here. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. So we can take a couple questions.
It's me again.
Hello.
Can you tell us what's in a kit?
Oh, yeah, sure. In the kit, you will find instructions. I also made an instructional video that's available on my website. No prior needlepoint experience is necessary. I know most people don't needlepoint nowadays, but I used it as the medium because I personally do a lot of freehand embroidery, but needlepoint happens on a grid, so it's easily countable. And that was the thing that sort of inspired me to think about it as the medium for this project. And then you get a blank square of needlepoint that's been templated out, so you don't personally have to count the stitches. I've already painstakingly drawn the area around the kit, around the square. And then you get beautiful undyed wool yarn that I sourced from a woman whose name is, I swear, Heidi Woolover. That is her real name. She raises sheep in upstate New York. And then you get a needle and a needle threader, and also a pre-addressed, pre-stamped envelope to make the return of your kit easy. I'm trying to make this the sort of full participation process as easy as possible for people. Yeah, and also information about the project. So.
Thanks.
Any more questions? All right, thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Hussein. My background is in sociology, and I'm now almost done with my thesis also in design and technology at Parsons here. I have been, to start working on my thesis, I did a list of all the problems that I saw from the social perspective, or the issues that actually cause social problems. And throughout that list, that included like poverty. Oh, all right. Is that better? Yeah. The list included poverty, hunger, water, a lot of issues that contribute to making social problems in developing countries even more worse. So the one I focused on was water, because as it's not very clear here, but in developing countries, there are three main issues with that, which is first, not having water connected to your house, so you'd have to walk for a long distance or carry it for a very long period of time. Second problem would be having it connected to your house or near it, but it's not clean enough to drink from. And also the third problem is having it being controlled by like a gang, or like a dwell being controlled by a certain group of people that are armed, and you have to pay them in order to get access to water. So what I'm doing is Eshrab. It's a device that collects water from the air and through condensation, and it could work in solar power, which make it completely sustainable, and it should be very efficient for people who don't have water or power connected to their houses. I started off the prototyping with the idea came from the Namibian desert beetle, which is on the top left, and it's this beetle that lives in the desert that has a certain pattern on its back, and through these bumps, it's able to, at the certain time of the day, condense water and then just lean forward and have the water flow to its mouth and drink from it. And I was very interested in biomimicry, and I was trying to see how this beetle was doing that. I started prototyping, and yeah, it was a very hard, like there were a lot of failures while I was prototyping, and like at some point, like in the last picture, like I thought that was going to be the thing that would work, and I was standing in the controlled environment with the device, and I was actually, my skin was condensing more water than the device itself. So I started to like try to understand what the problem was. And so to do condensation, you need two things to do it properly. You need to first have a surface that is cooler than the air around it. And secondly, to have this water that's being condensed move downwards, be pulled downwards by gravity. If it's the droplets are heavy enough, they would be pulled downwards. If they're not, they'll just stay on the surface and stay there until they're dried out and not leave space for new water to be condensed on it. So the cooling should be done through this very small plate called a Peltier plate. And when you connect power to it, one of the sides gets really cold and the other side gets really hot. The pattern that I wanted to do is I've been testing, like playing around with it, trying to figure out the best one. But the whole idea is basically that when the water starts condensing, when you limit the space where the water can grow, after a certain point, it won't have anywhere to go except for downwards. And by doing that, it would create a new empty space for more water to condense. I'll have a video that shows that more specifically. This is supposed to be how the device would look like. It's almost this big, and it has a battery, fan to do the cooling, the Peltier plates, and the core of it, which would be stainless steel, which is the best thing to drink from, basically, and have thermal conductivity. And it should also have an adjustable filter that you can connect any type of container to it and drink from it wherever you are. I wanted to play a video of, I 3D printed a piece in copper that has the pattern on it to get the precision that I need, because it's a very, very small scale. Like the whole thing is smaller than 2 inches. And basically, what I'm trying to show here is that if you can see in these yellow circles, the water flows downwards, and that creates more space for more water to condense, and then it pushes itself downwards and creates even more space. And that's what keeps the water continually condensating, except otherwise it would just stay there like other places in the pattern. It would stay there and it would just not move until it dries out. But this pattern allows it to clear more space for more water, and that's what actually makes it work. So after having this experiment being successful, so a device this, like the Peltier plate, the copper plate I had was this big, and it got me 10 milliliters in 15 minutes. And first I thought that was something this big. I thought like, this is good for a beetle, but that's definitely not gonna work for me. And then I did the math for it, and it turns out that that's 950 milliliters per day, which is almost a quarter of a gallon. And my target is actually almost half a gallon per day, because that's the minimum human consumption rate. So I started to think of ways to even make that better. I'm starting to think of like having pillars to increase the surface area and have more patterns around it. And I 3D printed that piece also in copper. I'm doing it in copper now because 3D printing in copper is cheaper, but of course the final thing would not be in copper. And so basically on each side there's a different pattern with a different size and spacing. And I wanted to see which one would be collecting more and like test that to finalize the device and actually have it working. And I was able to see, obviously, the one on the left, it's condensing much more water than the rest of them because of the very specific pattern and how it allows water to just slip downwards very quickly. So this would be the core of the device, and that's the part I'm working on right now. That's the part I want to develop, and as soon as I have that figured out, I'd have the video for that and start a Kickstarter campaign. The rest of the elements are already there. This is prototype of the cover, 3D printed also, and the heat sinks are on the sides, and the core would be in the middle, and it's supposed to be a very easy device to use. It should be used in developing countries that have lack of access to potable water. I already talked to a couple of manufacturers in Egypt, and they said it's a very good idea, and they would be happy to help, but they want the video of the proof of that thing working. I want it to be So my background is sociology. I worked with NGOs a lot, and one of the things I noticed is that if something is very expensive or too cheap, it doesn't succeed very much. So basically, like if you give something out for free, it loses its essence and importance. So the best optimum solution would be having something as cheap as possible, but then again, something that you would connect to as a personal device. The ideal zones for using that device, and these are actually ones that are done by companies that do same technology, but on like the very large scale, like the fridge scale device. And these are the zones I want to work with. And they're also the same zones that are going to predicted to have the water wars by 2025. And they're also the same zones that have like the best zones for harnessing solar power. So yeah, I was thinking it was coincidence first, but then when I came to think about it, it's basically because the water hits the sun hits these areas, making the water evaporate, and that's why there's more water in the air. So ironically, the hotter the place, the more water there is in the air, which is a better opportunity for the device. It's supposed to be very easy to use, so you'd have every component separate. You'd be able to sort of like assemble it in a DIY approach and like change the parts that are not working. And then, so you attach the fan, the battery, solar panels, adjust them to the angle that you need, which is depending on your place on the planet. It's supposed to be very easy to use. Wherever you have it, on a table or on the wall or wherever, it'd be easy to use. In this one, I have on the right the ones having solar panels, and left the ones that could be connected to a wall. But at the same time, I still have the batteries in there because in many developing countries, the power comes to the house at like 2 hours per day or something. So it would be better if we capture that and power the device for the rest of the day through that. The advantages I have is basically the efficiency of the device. It could be used indoors or outdoors. It's supposed to be very cheap, $20 maximum, $10 to $20. I'm trying to squeeze it to be $10. I know that's a lot for someone in a developing country, but if you think of it as an investment, so you buy once, like this device once, and as far as it will work, it will be providing water for you. It's supposed to get 2 liters per day, which is 0.5 gallons, which is the minimum human consumptions. The larger audience would be camping in humid areas, certain cities that need like a device like this quickly, like the ones that have crisis, like the Flint, Michigan. I'm also thinking of like having something like if you buy one here, you'd sponsor one in Africa or send one over there. And yeah, that's it. I'm right now almost done with the whole thing. I'm just finalizing it. I want to have the final piece and do have a nice video for that and start a Kickstarter campaign and launch it. That's it.
Thanks so much. Do we have any questions?
Using solar panels, I think there's a liability there because over time that solar panel can start to degrade, and then you'll need a replacement. Have you thought about using the energy of the sun, using like a passive sort of the heat from the sun being the source of the heat that you need, as opposed to using a solar panel? Because I know you need the difference in between the heat and the cold in order to get condensation. But then is the difference between the heat from the sun and the shade enough to do that in order to justify a design that doesn't have a solar panel that can break in order for this thing to be something that you can ultimately use for like thousands of years, you know, like, because if it doesn't rely on electronic parts, this thing will work forever. And I think that's more important. And also scaling of it, because that design, you can scale it to be 1,000 times bigger. You get 1,000 times more water. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's definitely a good idea if it's possible, and it is possible, but it's possible in certain places. So if the temperature is above 30 degrees Celsius, I'm not sure how much that is Fahrenheit, and the humidity is above 80%, then you won't actually need to power it. But these areas that have that much temperature and humidity are mostly tropical areas, and they don't have that much of like water issues. The areas I'm targeting are the ones above and below that, almost at the tropics of the equator and of the Capricorn and the Cancer. And these ones, it's really hot there, so like even in the shade, they would need some power to actually do the device. The thing that I didn't explain here, because it's a little technical, is that also this Peltier plate, this device that had like this 2 ceramic faces. So if you apply power to it, it gives you like one side gets hot, one side gets cold. If you apply heat to it, it actually provides power. So I'm trying to get the heat that's being extruded from the hot side and take that, recycle it into like power for the cold side. Also, the thing like the solar panels are supposed to be like if you buy them, you'd slide them in and they'd be replaceable. That would eliminate having to buy a new device if the solar panel, something happens to it. But yeah, like other than that, I think so. Like the device should be it should be completely sustainable, and I don't want it to be like any part of it to break down at any point. But if it does, I want it to be very easy to change that yourself and have it with like the cheapest price possible. You know, that's what I was thinking.
Hi. You said the device has a fan also, right?
Yeah.
So speaking to the whole electronic parts thing, I think that the moving parts are actually more of a concern than the solar panels are, since they don't, if it doesn't have moving parts, it's less likely to break. And also they don't degrade, from my understanding, they don't degrade that much over time. The solar panels that you'd put on your roof can last a human lifetime. So can you speak to like the durability of the fan versus that? Because I think that's actually more of a concern than the panels.
Sure. So the thing I had up here was basically it's a CPU heatsink. It's used for computers. So it's a heatsink, which is the metal pattern part, and it has a fan on top of that to cool it down. And it's the thing I actually like. The reason I actually use that is because it's something that you can buy off Amazon for like $4.
Oh, wow.
It's a really cheap and small device. And that's why I wanted to also have, like I didn't want to invent something for it. I wanted to get as much elements as possible from outside, you know? So these, the fans supposedly, if they're not moving much, like if they're steady in one place, they would, like their lifetime would be much bigger. And that's the case for the computer CPUs. Like it's really rare that you have to like,
Right.
you know.
When you have a computer, you don't need to replace the fan very often.
Almost, yeah. It takes a lot of time for you to need that.
And what's the purpose of the fan? Is it to move the water downwards or to cool the hot side?
To cool the hot side, exactly. So when the plate, one side is hot, one side is cold, if you make the hot side very cold, then the cold side gets hotter. So that would make the device, the temperature get even lower, and the temperature needs to only be lower than the dew point. The dew point is basically the point at which the air turns into liquid, basically. And if you get the surface to be at this point throughout the day, it should be condensing throughout the day compared to only at dawn, as we see here, because the surface is cold from the night and the air starts getting hot from the sun. So it's only this small fraction of time which happens. But if you have the surface always cold, it's supposed to be working the whole day.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Thanks.
And good luck
Thanks.
with the launch.
Thank you so much. We're going to move into our fourth presentation, which is Angela and Chloe. Sorry, here I am. And thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Chloe. This is Angela. Oh, sure. Thank you. I don't know if
We're
you guys
pretty
can
loud.
hear me. Yeah. We have the advantage of being two, so I can actually stand up here while Angela flips through. I'm finishing my last semester at the Strategic Design and Management program, Angela as well, and we both have a background in production in the fashion apparel industry. So we're going to start off, before we jump in, with a little exercise and actually ask all of you a question. If anyone has any idea of what this might be, and if you know because you work in the industry, please don't answer. And you can, just throw it out, like what do the shapes look like?
Patterns for cutting fabric.
Okay, you got it. Good job.
I'm not-
Yes, it does, but it's rare that people come up with that. We've heard coffins. People have rarely had any idea. But yes, it is a pattern for making pants. And more specifically, it's called a marker in the industry. And this marker was made or was used to make these pants. So what we're actually here mostly to talk to you about is all of the pink area in the marker, which is all of the fabric that never actually makes its way into an article of clothing, but actually makes its way into a landfill instead. So now that we all know what a marker is, does anyone have any idea what this marker makes? What article of clothing? A suit. Something close to that. Yes, a jacket. And actually, it's this jacket. So we just wanted to make it as relatable as possible for you to really understand that piece of it. So although the jacket marker has less pink area, you can imagine that after you begin making hundreds and thousands, the waste really starts to add up. And just to give you a little visualization of waste, this is waste that these are images from a New York City factory in the garment district. And this waste is produced from about 300 units, 3 to 350 units. So just to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. And these are the garments that the previous waste was created from. So these images look innocent and quite beautiful, but they're actually not. And currently, all of that waste that we just saw is going into landfills, and it will continue to do so unless we do something about it. So just to give you a little bit of landscape around textile waste. Currently, 85% of textile waste nationwide is being thrown into the garbage, 100% of which is recyclable in one way or another. In New York City alone, we throw away more than 386 tons of textile waste a year, worth more than, or has the potential to be worth more than $61.8 million. And the textile waste takes up about 5 to 6% of our New York City landfill space, most of which are not actually in New York City, as Debbie Lee pointed out to us. So this is particularly problematic given the current agenda of New York City with this ambitious goal of a zero waste, being a zero landfill waste city by 2030. Because currently there's basically no infrastructure set up to manage this waste. And certainly at the scale that it's being produced at. And what the initiatives that are set up to manage textile waste are all focused to post-consumer waste. So basically all focused towards the articles of clothing that we're all wearing right now. And all of the pre-consumer textile waste has kind of just been left behind. And this is, we've been asking ourselves, like, how is it possible that people haven't thought about this? There's so much waste being produced at the pre-consumer level. But it's really, in many ways, a new problem, or a relatively new problem, because it's really only over the last 3 decades that we've been producing textiles and clothing at such incredibly high rates. So when we talk about fast fashion, there's been a lot of focus on labor injustice, and that certainly is a big issue, but there's a huge environmental toll as well. So who are we and what do we do? Threadcycle collects textile waste from garment manufacturers to reduce New York City's landfill use, energy waste, and preserve valuable raw materials for reuse. And so when we first started this project, we had this very ambitious idea that we were going to figure out how we could immediately recycle all of the waste. We thought we would partner with the City of Sanitation, and we would get all these trucks, and there are all these technologies that actually currently exist to recycle this waste. But after a lot of research and exploring, we realized that while you can shred almost all textile waste down to make industrial fibers, they can be used. There's also a possibility of burning the waste for biofuel, although that has some other environmental issues associated with it. But in both cases, there is zero infrastructure currently in place. And so we started to explore the upcycling possibility, which would allow us to at least push forward some change and begin testing our theories about how we could actually, if we could collect this waste and how it would work, and how we could collect it to make new products in some way. So we have moved towards, see you now? Yeah, okay. We're gonna switch. Swap.
So given all of that, we felt like we had to start taking it kind of in steps and start somewhere where we could manage. So what we wanted to do is take all the textile waste that we collect and actually use it for upcycling, turn it into a new product. So actually what you can see over here, if you're not in front of the pillar, these are a couple of the products that we've made from fabric scraps that we've actually captured from factories in the garment district in the last 2 months or so. So the idea is that we would actually be able to sell craft kits that would have as the primary material the scraps that we actually have rescued from manufacturers, and a couple of other things that are sustainably sourced, where people could start making some of these things and we could ship them nationwide. We also want to have workshops where we would teach people how to do this. It could even be kids. Actually, none of these products over here involve any glue, so not nearly as dangerous in the hands of small children. And then more long-term, we would like to develop brand partnerships with large-scale retailers where we could start encouraging retailers to use materials that already exist rather than making quilts and things out of new fiber that could be used for something that is kind of just better set up for it. So education is a big part of what we'd like to share with both the kits and the workshops. So similar to the experience that you guys had when we showed you these very strange images and what the heck are they, we would like to explain that to people to bring them closer to the supply chain. We have an awareness when we go to throw away one of our garments or donate our garment that has to go somewhere. But there's a whole piece of waste that people never see. In fact, I have a fashion design background and I was never taught about, I know you're shocked. I was never taught about how to minimize the waste when I was creating a garment or designing something. So we also looked into the DIY and craft market. Some of you may know it's actually booming, especially since the recession. So actually in the US, it's a $29 billion investment every year in DIY and craft materials. That does include like Home Depot, Michaels, et cetera. Also, the subscription market is becoming more and more popular, which is kind of what we would utilize with these kits. So the workshops would be local, we're here in New York, but the kits we could ship nationwide. And that's a $5 billion a year business. So we're hoping to kind of take a very small portion of that and achieve $5 million in 5 years. So our goal for this year is to ship 2,000 kits nationwide. The kits range from $25 to $35. We want to host 40 workshops with an average of 18 participants, and those would be at like YMCA, JCC, museums, textile art centers, Parsons maybe. And through that would keep 900 pounds of waste out of the landfills. We would also be setting up our operations and applying for different grants. So in the long term, 900 pounds is really not that much. We actually measured 6 different locations, manufacturers in the garment district, and in a week they produced almost a ton, which is 2,000 pounds. So it's a very, very big problem, and crafts are not going to, unfortunately, not going to make a dent. But they'll help us to get some revenue to deal with some of these longer term goals, which is to research buyers of the raw material that you can shred fibers back down into. It's used for insulation, carpet, padding, we mentioned that. Also determine the viability of using it for biofuel and build the infrastructure that would really be able to handle larger quantities. So this is kind of our 5-year plan. We're going to start small and then work our way up to dealing with large scale. So what we're asking for from you guys. So we are trying to kind of collect some funding to bootstrap the beginning operations. Luckily, the kit business is an easier one to get into. It doesn't involve too much inventory, especially with subscription, but we will need storage units, et cetera. We also would love if any of you know of any grants or funding sources that you think would be appropriate for us to apply to. Like we mentioned, we're looking into the EPA. And then also contacts at locations that might be interested in our workshops, or if you know different craft suppliers that are making sustainable materials, because obviously that's a very important piece of our kits. All right, and finally, this is our website. Please follow us on Instagram, Threadcycle NYC, and you can kind of see what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Hello, thank you again for this great presentation. My question is, of course, unfortunately, again, a lot more longer-term question. And I know that this project is only just getting started, but maybe down the road, it might be feasible for you to consider a candle-to-grave analysis, because when you're going to change the middle points, the production cycle and the consumption cycle, we need to also look at how the raw material is sourced, and that when we change the system, that we minimize the human suffering that will need to be.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
absolutely, and that's something that we've been, very concerned about, is the whole, the cradle-to-cradle circular economy issue. And currently, I mean, we could stop producing textiles and have enough that already exists forever, I want to say. The problem is, and there are mills, particularly in Europe, there are some places and in Italy that are starting to utilize that technology, where you can actually take cotton and break it down, use the fibers to make new cotton. Cotton is an incredibly water-heavy, to grow cotton, it's incredibly terrible for the environment, as well as polyester, which is a plastic. So as Debbie Lee pointed out, as technology is changing and getting traction, we would very much hope that we would be able to work to actually have these textiles turned into new raw materials. And
and then we're also looking, kind of to your point, to work with designers at some point to start incorporating more zero waste principles in the actual designs. Historically, kimonos, for example, actually have no waste. And that's because we used to have textiles that were a very valuable material. It took a very long time to make, and you treated them with respect. At this point, we can make textiles very, very cheaply and garments very cheaply, and so we're just cranking them out. So that is certainly part of the problem, and it will just take a bit longer to address that. So again, this is kind of like a phase one approach, where we're trying to find a solution for the waste that we already have as we start to work with designers to create less waste from the very beginning.
Any more questions?
What were the challenges you found with shredding and burning?
So shredding, we found there's still one business in New York City that shreds fibers. But basically, no one wants to deal with fabric scraps. Everyone wants to deal with our clothing, because most of it, actually, they resell or export to developing nations. The textile scraps are a nuisance to them. They're worth very little, according to them, and so they really just don't want to deal with them. So there's really only one business that's still accepting scraps, but they actually charge you to take them off their hands. And it's a very complex ownership of this fabric from designer. It's actually the designer who's buying it, and then they're paying the factory to make the garment, and they don't actually ask about the waste at all. They just want the dress. So the factory, who has not bought this waste, just wants to get rid of it in the easiest way possible, so it gets thrown away. And so they're not going to pay us to pick it up, and the designer doesn't want to think about it because they've already paid for it and consider it a loss. So it's like a very complicated system. But the shredding aspect of it, because there's only one business that will do it, and they'll charge you kind of an arm and a leg to do it, we have to figure out, like, does it make more sense that, and truly they're a middle person, they're also shipping it to North Carolina where it gets shredded, so then there's also issues of, like, how much energy does it take to ship to North Carolina, and does that make sense? The burning, we still have to do a lot of research on. Neither of us, unfortunately, are chemists, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. So we are going to work with someone they have to determine the caloric potential, meaning what the potential is of the waste to create biofuel. And so that's a process that we still have to work on.
I just wanted to know if by any chance you'd thought about training people in communities who are looking for jobs and looking for job training and creating a program around that, because that's also something that you could most likely get funding for. There's a need for that.
Yes, I would say we've thought of, there's so many different like directions that we would love to go in with this, or that we could go in, and that was one of them. You know, we thought about different ways that this waste could be used to make like stuffing for jackets for homeless people, sleeping bags. Like there's just so much valuable raw material that's being thrown in the garbage every day that we're fortunate enough to have free access to. So we've thought about a lot of different ways of going with this, but we should talk about potentially collaborating.
We're starting with the styrofoam tray.
Exactly. Actually, your presentation really resonated for us because this does feel like a small solution to a very big problem, but it really is very much a stage one, just to seeing how we can build a community around it, how we can start educating people around what pre-consumer waste even is, and also hopefully getting a little bit of revenue to start.
And by the way, those new plates are made of pre-consumer waste.
Yay.
So they're the pattern. It's the pattern that's cut from other high-end compostable plates that you buy at the store. So it's an interesting model.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an area that I think is much more developed in, food packaging and like plastics and yeah. Anyone else?
I have a good suggestion. You guys can consider applying to NISCA. Also, it's the New York State Council on the Arts. And since a lot of your projects are kind of crafty and even involve education, they have various different categories, but there's an arts education category that might work for you.
That was great. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Thank you so much.